The rain had stopped an hour ago, but the mud never forgave anyone for that. Sergeant Emily Thompson's hands were raw beneath her gloves, blistered from a shovel handle that had rubbed the same spot open 3 times that night. Behind her, under a sagging canvas tent, 22 soldiers slept in a heap of exhaustion, their rifles cradled like children. She was the only one still awake. She was the only one still digging. Before I tell you what happened next, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love knowing who's listening. Nobody had asked for volunteers. Command had simply pointed at her name on the roster and moved on, the way they always did when a task was miserable and unglamorous. Dig the perimeter trench. Alone, while the rest of the platoon rested for tomorrow's advance. She hadn't argued. Arguing never changed anything in the Army. Not for a woman who had spent 3 years proving, inch by inch, that she belonged in rooms full of men who assumed otherwise. So she dug. She told herself it was just dirt. Just another night. Just one more thing to survive before dawn. But something about the silence bothered her. It wasn't the silence of sleep. It was the silence of things holding their breath. She paused, shovel half buried, and looked out past the ridge toward the valley where their forward base glowed like a scattered handful of embers. A lone sentry stood near the lights, binoculars raised, scanning the hills with the lazy confidence of a man who believed nothing would happen tonight. Emily didn't share that confidence. She had learned, the hard way, that the nights everyone assumed were quiet were the nights that changed everything. Her mother used to tell her that fear was just attention wearing a disguise. Emily hadn't understood that until she enlisted. Now, standing waist-deep in a half-finished trench with mud crusted to her cheekbones, and her hair escaping its knot in wet strands, she understood it completely. Something in her chest had gone tight the way it always did right before her instincts turned out to be right. She thought it was nothing. She was wrong. A glint. Just a flicker, low on the far ridge, gone before she could be sure she'd seen it. Metal doesn't shine like that in moonlight unless something is moving it. She stood perfectly still, breath shallow, eyes fixed on the black shape of the hillside. There. Again. A second flicker, and then a third, spaced with the deliberate rhythm of men trying not to be noticed. Her pulse climbed into her throat. Every rational part of her mind offered comfort. It's nothing. It's a rock. It's your imagination after 20 hours awake. But the part of her that had grown up hunting deer with her father in the Appalachian dark, the part that knew the difference between stillness and concealment, refused to be talked down. She could wake the sentry. She could radio it in and risk being wrong. Risk becoming the soldier who cried wolf over a shadow. The woman who already had to work twice as hard to be taken seriously. Or she could stay silent, finish her trench, and let the professionals with the binoculars handle what they were paid to handle. For one long, terrible moment, she almost chose silence. Then she thought of the 22 men sleeping behind her, trusting the dark to protect them the way it always had. She thought of what silence would cost if she was right, and said nothing. She dropped the shovel. She moved low along the ridge, mud sucking at her boots, until she reached the sentry post. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. She simply pointed, and something in the certainty of her raised arm made the young man's binoculars snap toward the hillside without question. He went rigid. He'd seen it too. Within 90 seconds, the camp behind them transformed. Radios crackled low and urgent. Boots hit the mud in tight formation. Men moving not like individuals, but like a single creature waking to danger, silent and coordinated. Weapons rising in unison as headlamps clicked off one by one. Somewhere in the command tent, a colonel who had never learned Emily's first name barked coordinates into a receiver, coordinates that had come from a woman with a shovel and a feeling she refused to ignore. The enemy position, dug in along the tree line less than 400 meters from the sleeping platoon, was exposed before it could strike. What could have been an ambush at first light became, instead, a controlled engagement fought entirely on American terms. Not a single soldier under that canvas tent ever woke to gunfire. They woke instead to relief, and later, to a story about the sergeant who had been digging a hole nobody wanted to dig. Nobody applauded her that night. There was no ceremony in the mud, no dramatic music, only tired men shaking her hand one by one as the sun came up gray and uncertain over the ridge. But in the days that followed, something shifted. The men who had once seen her as the soldier assigned the worst jobs began to see her as the soldier whose instincts had saved their lives. Respect, she learned, is rarely given. It is dug, one unglamorous shift at a time, until the ground finally gives way to something solid. Because the work nobody wants to do is often the work that saves everyone. And courage doesn't always look like charging forward. Sometimes it looks like a woman alone in the mud, refusing to look away. She had come to that ridge expecting nothing but blisters and silence. She left it having seen what everyone else had missed. If this story moved you, tell us in the comments what part stayed with you the longest. And subscribe, because there are more stories like Emily's waiting to be told, of quiet courage that changes everything when no one is watching.